Hey, everybody. I want to apologize first off for being gone for so long. Uh, just have had other things come up recently, and I haven't really had the chance to come and make one of these videos like I wanted to, so sorry for that. I'm going to take a little bit of a detour again today from movies that I love that everybody else hates, because there's something that's really bothered me for a long time about film goers and film critics, and more in particular amateur critics. And I actually got into kind of a debate about this on a forum the other day, and kind of got myself into some hot water with some other people who thought I was specifically calling them out for their tastes, and that's really wasn't what I was trying to do. But I'd like to talk about a term that gets thrown around a lot by people who are kind of amateur film critics, and it's a term that I think has value in film criticism, but the way a lot of people use it, I feel like, is way more pretentious than they realize, and that's the term of pacing. Now, I'm not saying pacing in a film is not valid. It is a completely valid criticism. If you have a movie that's too slow or a movie that doesn't let you breathe, those are equally valid reasons to not be able to get into a film as much as you might want to. Where my main criticism is, and people that use this term pacing as much as I've seen it used lately, is it seems like people want to use the term pacing for any time that anything is ever added or removed from a film, and it doesn't matter how substantial or inconsequential the edit is. People like to say, well, this completely ruins the pacing. Now, I do a lot of fan editing, and I probably will make some more videos on fan editing, because that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. Is I love the fan edit community, and people that, you know, will take a scene out, or they'll rearrange a scene. And like I think I mentioned on a previous video that I made a fan edit of Karate Kid 2 and 3 where they're swapped, and 2 is 3 and 3 is 2, and I just think they work a lot better that way. And I had to rearrange a few things and delete a few things and cut a line off here and there, because it would have given away that you had just seen part 2. So, you know, fan edits I think are a lot of fun. I made a fan edit of The Crow, which was all black and white except for the flashback scenes. Things like that. I just wanted to see them film that way out of curiosity. So it really hits me close to home when people say, well, if you do this or you do that, it ruins the pacing. And the specific discussion I was in was a discussion of the UK and US cuts of The Shining, which I wasn't even aware until a few years ago that there was an alternate cut of The Shining. I'd always just seen the longer US cut. Had no idea there was one in the UK that's about 25-30 minutes shorter than the one here in the US. But I made the point that, you know, there were some people that showed up and said, you know, the UK version's better, the pacing is better, it's a more claustrophobic story. And then other people vehemently say, well, the US cut is 1,000 times better. I don't know. I haven't seen the UK cut, and this was probably my biggest fault in chiming in, is that I had not seen that cut, and until I've seen them both, I probably shouldn't have said anything. But I made the point, which I do still kind of stand by this point, which is I have grown up with the longer cut of The Shining. So to me, it's not the longer cut. It just is the film. So if I were to see the UK version, that would by default become the short cut, or the shorter cut. And it would be deleting scenes that I have grown up seeing in the film my entire life, assuming that was the only version of the movie. And I don't care. My point was, I don't care if it helps the pace of the film to get rid of those scenes. I am never going to prefer a shorter version. Now, there are some films I think that some tightening of some scenes can help, don't get me wrong. In the case of a film like The Shining specifically, there's not a frame of that movie that's not brilliant. From a brilliant director at the top of his game, I mean, everything about it is perfect. And I would not want... It's like somebody And I made this point. It's like somebody telling me, well, there's a much better cut of, now episode 1 we can talk about, but the original Star Wars. It'd be like somebody coming up and saying, well, here's a much better version of Star Wars. It's 20 minutes shorter. I am never going to like that. Even if technically it has better pacing, I'm never going to like that as much as the original Star Wars, because that's the film I have always grown up with, always known, and anything that you take away from it, that's going to be a scene that is now gone that I am going to miss. So my second point about pacing is that people tend to over-exaggerate the importance of one scene or two scenes, or the excision of one or two scenes, because it throws the pacing off. It ruins the pacing. Okay, one of my biggest pet peeve titles for this criticism is Halloween. Famously, when Halloween was released in 1978, the networks, when it aired on television, needed to actually pad. The movie's so short, it's like an hour and a half, it's 93 minutes, I believe. So the network needed to pad the film, even for a 2-hour time slot. It was too short. So they asked John Carpenter, while he was helping with shooting some scenes for Halloween 2, they said, you've got access to the actors. Can you give us a couple, like, 5, 6, 7, 8 more minutes so that we can fit this into a 2-hour time slot? So John Carpenter agreed, and he shot a few scenes. Now, it is a total of 8 minutes, okay? 8 minutes. One of the scenes is a scene at the very beginning where Dr. Loomis is pleading with the doctors to please keep Michael in the sanitarium because he's dangerous. Then he walks in, sees Michael sitting there, and says, you fooled them, haven't you, but not me. And then we go to 1978. Then there's 2 other scenes. There's one after Michael breaks out of the sanitarium and Dr. Loomis sees the word sister written on the wall and he leaves. The other is Lori in her house with the towel around her head because her hair was different. Trivia, that's why she had the towel on her head. And it's, like a 2-3 minute scene with her friends, and they're talking about seeing the station wagon, and it's following one of her friends, and they don't know what's going on. Anyway, it explains where one of her friends got the blouse later. And it's 8 minutes of footage. It's not that substantial. I think it's more like 7 minutes of footage. But here's the thing. You're talking about an 1.5-hour film, okay? This is not a long movie. And there are people that I have gotten into this debate. Now, I grew up with the television version. It's the one I saw all the time. I saw these scenes. I grew up going like, when I would see the theatrical version, when I would buy it, and I'd be like, wait, where's the scene where he tells Michael, you fooled them, but not me? I know that was in the movie. And I ended up finding out that it was for the network broadcast. So I have my own personal version of Halloween that has the color timing I prefer. It has the scenes that I prefer. Has the soundtrack that I prefer. It's the original mono. Original. They've screwed that up a couple of times, and it's not been the original, but this is. Anyway, I have had heated debates before with people who say, well, the television version of Halloween sucks. It ruins the pacing. Does it really? It's a 93-minute movie. You're adding 7 minutes to it over the course of 93 minutes. It just doesn't make that much of a consequential difference one way or another. You're not going to take a fantastic movie and interject, a couple of minutes one way or another and either completely come up with a masterpiece where once was a pile of crap, and you're also not going to take, some heralded, piece of filmmaking genius and turn it into a pile of, because you put a scene in there that somebody doesn't like. And people just throw this term pacing around like, and again, I am not saying that the word pacing has no merit. I'm not saying that there's not something to be said for a film having a rhythm and a flow and one scene going into the next scene. I get all that. I just don't see what some people do when it comes to. Now there are examples that are extreme examples, like Dances with Wolves. Some people really hate the long version of Dances with Wolves. There's a 3-hour cut, a 4-hour cut. Personally, for me, I think it's a wash. I think you get all the main points that you're supposed to get in the 3-hour cut. So that could be a case for the 4-hour cut is unnecessary because it makes a 3-hour movie 4 hours and it's the same film. That could also be a selling point. If you love Dances with Wolves, here's another hour of it, and it doesn't really detract from anything. I personally enjoy the theatrical cut of Peter Jackson's King Kong better than the extended cut. There's a scene toward the end of the movie that is played for laughs, right when everything's ramping up, that I think really just, you know, makes you laugh when I don't think you should be laughing. You should be right in the middle of the climax of the film. So that kind of sudden change of tone, I think, bothers me more than pacing issues. I think the idea of, you know, a few, you know, 5, 6, 7 minutes of scenes spread out, completely ruin the pacing of a movie that's only an hour and a half, I think is really ridiculous. And I think people get way, way overboard with their expletives talking about, you know, oh, this scene ruins the movie, or that scene not being there ruins the movie. No, it doesn't. If you like the movie, if 99% of the movie is there, like, as much grief as I get as I give the George Lucas changes to Star Wars, I personally watched the original version of Star Wars. I won't watch the revisions, but if somebody's watching the special edition of Star Wars, it's still Star Wars, for God's sake. It's okay. The changes, yes, I find them personally annoying, but again, it's because they change tone in several places, and they change meaning, which is even worse, like with the Greedo scene, that changes meaning. But I think if you're arguing that, like, there's a scene in Empire Strikes Back that people always, the special edition, that people hate, and it's, I don't personally like the scene either, but not for the reasons that people say. They say that it's toward the end of Empire Strikes Back, and Vader says, "Bring my shuttle," in the original version. In the new one, I think he says something like, "Alert the Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival," or something like that. Well, now there's a new scene that shows him taking the shuttle off of Cloud City, landing back in the hangar on his Star Destroyer, coming out of the shuttle. And people are like, that just ruins the pacing of the end of the movie. No, it doesn't. It's like 30 seconds of footage, maybe. Okay, everything you love about the scene is still there. I just think people are really full of themselves with this. I really do. I just, you know, I'm probably going to get flamed for that. But now, again, I prefer the original version of Empire Strikes Back. But I think part of the reason that people say this, and this is, I'm going to wrap up with this because I'm running a little bit long here, but I think this has more to do with the way people remember a film and the way they have a film in their head. Like, if I see I can watch a movie that I've grown up with, that I'm intimately familiar with. If we get a new cut of it, like Crimson Tide. Okay, I watched Crimson Tide a bunch when it first came out. I really enjoyed it. There is an extended version on DVD. When I watched that extended version, to this day, I couldn't tell you which scene goes into the next scene, sitting here talking about Crimson Tide to save my life. It's been forever since I watched that movie. But still, every one of those extra scenes will jump out at me. Because there's just something different. There's something about it, I'm like, this wasn't in the original one I watched. All of that stuff, that useless stuff, is stored in our film lover brains somewhere, and I think that that's true for all films. And I think when you start screwing around and adding things or taking things away, but this is why I don't think I would ever get on board with a 20-30 minute shorter version of The Shining. I would miss those scenes. I mean, I don't care if they're required or not. Stanley Kubrick is notorious for, you know, intentionally paced films, slow. to kind of test your patience, especially in a film like that. That's part, for me, that's part of the horror, is how much room it has to breathe, and just that maddening slowness of the building insanity. I love that. And I don't think chopping 20 minutes out might make it a more streamlined, effective horror film, but it would be less of a Kubrick film. And I know that, you know, he approved of the changes, but every story I've seen about this was that he released the cut he wanted to release in the US. It was getting crap reviews, as a lot of his films did, because they weren't appreciated. It got released in the UK, or it was about to be released in the UK. They said, hey, let's trim it down. People are saying it's too long, and he agreed to it, and he trimmed it down. So they're both technically director's cuts. So I'm not saying it's less of a Kubrick movie because he didn't make those decisions. He did. But I still think the version he originally put out was the one he wanted to put out. I mean, if nobody had come to him after the fact and said, hey, we should trim this, people aren't liking it. Kubrick's one of the last directors, I think, that the argument should be made for that, well, he changed the movie because other people didn't like it. I don't care what other people like. Most people, a lot of people don't like Kubrick because he's pretty cerebral and out there, but you know, if that's the argument to be made, that we're going to make everything, you know, the lowest common denominator. I mean, look at Blade Runner. It's still considered the best version of Blade Runner overall, not by everybody. There are defenders of the theatrical cut. There's defenders of the work print. There's defenders of the director's cut before the final cut changes. But for the most part, the final cut was one of the most tasteful changes after the director's cut, which was a huge change to get rid of the narration and the happy ending and all that. I won't go into that, but still, to this, if I was going to show somebody Blade Runner for the first time, I'm going to show them the final cut. It's the most polished. It's the closest to what Ridley Scott originally wanted, and I'm sure some people that watch that and hate it. In fact, I got into a dispute with somebody not too long ago about he loved the narration and he hated that they took it out. So, but again, coming back to pacing, last thing I'm going to say, I just think it's overused, and I think people exaggerate what impact this scene, that scene has on a film because they want to sound intelligent and they want to sound like they know a lot about film criticism when really they're just being picky because it's not something that they personally like. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I'm almost at 18 minutes here, so I will see you guys later. I'm gonna do probably one more off normal topic video next time. Have something I really want to talk about. But after that, I will get back to movies I love that everyone else hates. All right, thanks.